back to the Parent Guide, the show where we step past the shame, past the moralizing, and pull back the curtain on what is truly happening inside the hearts, minds, and the neurobiology of our teenage sons. Parents, I am your host, Matt Bulkley. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and day in and day out, my clinical practice is dedicated to helping families navigate this modern digital minefield. So if you are listening to this right now, whether you're sitting in a car, the school pickup line, or maybe going for an early morning walk, or sitting quietly in your living room late at night after your kids have gone to bed, I want to speak directly to you for just a moment. If you have discovered something agonizing on your son's phone, maybe you've stumbled across an open browser tab, or you looked at a router log, or maybe you've just simply felt a heavy, cold distance growing between you and your teen son who used to be bright, expressive, and open with you. I know the quiet panic that you're living in, and it is a terrifying, isolating feeling. You look at your son and you feel like he's slipping through your fingers into a dark, digitized fog. And your instinct as a parent is to fix it immediately. You plead with him, you set up passcodes and screen time limits, you hand him books on integrity, or maybe you sit him down for a heartbreaking conversation where he cries, he looks you in the eye, and he promises deeply and sincerely, I will never do it again. And then 2 weeks later, you find out that it's happening all over again. Well, when that happens, the default assumption for most parents is to view this as a failure of moral character. Maybe the conclusion is a total lack of willpower, or a fundamental sign of disrespect toward your family values. But parents, what if I told you that the root of the struggle with compulsive pornography, it's not about a lack of discipline. What if the real culprit is a quiet neurological crisis that's happening right under your nose, one that is actively reshaping his developing brain every single day, long before he ever opens an explicit website? Well, parents, today we're going to take a deep clinical dive into an invisible connection that the vast majority of parents completely miss, and that is this. There is a direct line between short-form video algorithm apps like TikTok and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, and the breakdown of a teenager's ability to resist compulsive behaviors, particularly pornography. So I would like to explore with you today how fast-paced digital feeds are systematically eroding a young person's attentional control. And I'd like to cover the actual neuroscientific research, including EEG brain tracking studies showing what happens to the adolescent prefrontal cortex under constant algorithmic stimulation. Share with you 2 real-world clinical case studies from my practice that illustrate how this plays out in a teen boy's daily life, and the exact psychological mechanism that is known as the inhibitory braking system, and why a boy with a depleted attention literally lacks the neurological hardware to say no in the heat of the moment. And then finally, provide concrete evidence-based solutions that work, specifically looking at structured offline cognitive tools like our recovery toolbox for teens, and then for deep environmental resets like our Star Guides Wilderness Therapy Program. So parents, settle in. You're not a bad parent. Your son's not a broken cause. So let's get to work. So to really understand the mechanics of what we're dealing with, I want to share a story with you. And of course, as always, I've changed the names and identifying details to protect confidentiality. But this is the story of a 16-year-old that I'll call Ethan. And Ethan's parents, Mark and Sarah, first sat on my couch in my office. They were visibly exhausted. Mark was holding a yellow legal pad filled with notes and dates and times and router logs and app use graphs, and his wife sat next to him and on the verge of tears. And as they described Ethan, their son, is a teen who had historically been the heart of their home. He was an avid athlete, a varsity midfielder on the soccer team who lived for soccer games, and he played acoustic guitar, and he kept almost a 4.0 GPA. And most importantly, he was a kid who was present. He laughed at the dinner table. He engaged with siblings. He loved the banter of family life. But over the space of about a year and a half, that boy had vanished. He had become increasingly irritable, highly defensive, increasingly reclusive. He had dropped out of soccer, claiming that he was just tired of the coach, and his grades had dropped from A's and B's to D's and F's. And he spent almost all of his free time locked in his bedroom with his door closed and his face illuminated by that harsh blue glow of his phone. And of course, the tipping point came when his mom went into his room to grab his laundry and found an old laptop open on his bed displaying explicit pornography. And they confronted him about it, and he broke down and confessed and cried and swore that he hated it and wanted to stop. And so they put parental controls on his devices, took away the laptop, and implemented checking his phone on a daily basis. But within about 3 weeks, they found out that he had bypassed the restrictions, was using an old device that he had traded a friend for at school. And the cycle repeated multiple times over the next 6 months. Discovery, intense guilt and tears, and then restriction and a brief period of compliance. And then just like clockwork, a complete hidden relapse into the more extreme material. And his parents were convinced that Ethan was developing a severe personality change, or that he simply didn't care about his family or his future. So when I started to work with Ethan in our first individual session, I didn't start by asking him about the explicit websites that he was visiting. I didn't ask him about the search history or his shame. I asked him a very simple question. Ethan, what does it feel like inside your head on a normal Tuesday afternoon? And Ethan pulled down his hoodie over his hands and was looking at the floor and said something to the effect of, well, I feel like my brain is just constantly vibrating. I can't even sit through a class at school anymore than the first 10 minutes. I feel restless. I feel anxiety. I feel this boredom. I can't even watch a movie with my family on the weekends. It's way too long. So something isn't changing, or it's not exciting within just a few minutes that I'm bored. I feel like I'm going crazy. I just have to pick up my phone and swipe. And notice what Ethan was describing here. He wasn't talking about sexual desire or sexual drive. He was describing really more of a degradation of his cognitive infrastructure. His brain had been trained to exist in this state of high frequency, continuous novelty. So when Ethan sat down in his room to try to do homework, or when he felt lonely or stressed or uncomfortable, he encountered what I call the quiet spaces of life. But because his brain had lost its ability to tolerate low stimulation environments, those quiet spaces felt physically agonizing to him. His threshold for boredom had become obliterated. In that state of intense, agitated restlessness, Ethan would open his phone. He would start by scrolling short form videos, TikToks, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, for hours at a time. But eventually, even short video clips couldn't keep up with that escalating demand for dopamine. His brain was chasing an ever higher high to soothe an underlying state of dysregulation. From short form videos, his thumb would naturally transition into explicit adult websites, and which would give him the ultimate high intensity digital dopamine release. So Ethan didn't just have a porn problem. Ethan had a systemic breakdown of his brain's executive control and attention systems, and the pornography was simply the ultimate destination of an already hijacked reward pathway. So parents, let's step back from this story for a moment and look at the hard science here. Why is this happening to an entire generation of young men? Is this just typical teenage rebellion, or is there something that's fundamentally different about the tech that our children are holding in their hands compared to what previous generations experienced? And to answer this, I think we have to look at recent neuro research that examines the impact of short form video platforms on developing adolescent brains. For decades, psychologists studied attention is really a relatively static trait, but modern neuroimaging and EEG has revealed that the human attention system is more of a dynamic, malleable neural circuit, and right now that circuit is being subjected to an unprecedented biological experiment. So let's look at this. It's a landmark study in 2024 published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. And the researchers, they set out to measure precise impact of frequent, heavy, mobile, short video consumption on human cognitive functions using advanced EEG tracking to observe real-time electrical activity in the brain. And what this research team discovered was pretty staggering. Frequent exposure to fast-paced short videos caused measurable direct alterations in the brain's microstate dynamics and electrical frequency bands. So specifically, it severely impaired what neuroscientists called sustained attention. So in other words, the ability of the frontal lobes to maintain focus on a single non-stimulating task over a prolonged period. The study demonstrated that as short video consumption increases, the brain's prefrontal cortex exhibits decreased beta wave activity, which is associated with active focused problem solving and hyperreactive delta and theta activity, signaling a state of continuous cognitive fragmentation. Well, so why does short form video content do this so effectively? To understand that, I think you have to got to look at the platforms that were built for them. So apps like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts are not neutral media platforms. They are supercomputers pointed directly at the human brainstem. They operate on what behavioral psychology refers to as variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the exact psychological mechanism that makes things like slot machines the most addictive gambling tools on earth. So when your son swipes up on a short video feed, his brain does not know what is coming next. First swipe, maybe it's a boring cooking video, no reward there. Next swipe, maybe a mild joke, a small reward there. And then maybe the third swipe, an intense or shocking or sexually suggestive clip, which boom, brings that massive dopamine spike. This unpredictability creates a hyper dopamine state. The brain begins anticipating the next hit before the thumb even moves. And within a 3-second window, if a video fails to deliver immediate stimulation, the adolescent brain experiences a micro drop in dopamine, creating an uncomfortable sensation of friction or boredom, and then the user swipes up to alleviate that friction. Another crucial piece of research came in 2023, and this was published in Frontiers in Psychology, and this study investigated short-form video addiction in young adults, and it found that it directly erodes a core psychological capacity known as attentional control. So attentional control is the mental steering wheel. It's the ability to choose what you pay attention to and probably more importantly, what you ignore. So this research team, they found that heavy short video consumption fosters an intensely short-term oriented mindset. It trains the brain to discard long-term goals like getting good grades or building real-world friendships or staying true to one's moral values in favor of immediate, frictionless visual gratification. Well, so let's take all of this science and superimpose it onto the adolescent male brain. So the adolescent brain is undergoing a massive neurological renovation. The limbic system, which is the emotional impulse-driven reward-seeking engine of the brain, it is fully mature by early adolescence, but the prefrontal cortex, the logical, forward-thinking area responsible for impulse control, risk assessment, long-term planning, it does not fully mature until about age 25. So when you take a brain with a fully developed emotional engine and an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, and then you expose it to the algorithmic feeds that are designed by really the world's top behavioral scientists to maximize screen time, well, you create a perfect storm. You effectively are giving a teenager a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes and then pouring high-octane algorithmic fuel directly into the tank. Well, parents, let's build the bridge now between these two issues. So how exactly does a degraded attention span and short video addiction lead straight into compulsive pornography use? Well, this brings us to a foundational principle in behavioral neuroscience. Sustained attention really is the bedrock of inhibitory control. So let me break down what this means in plain language here. So inhibitory control is the brain's braking system. It's the ability to suppress a strong internal urge or an external temptation in order to align your behavior with your long-term goals or moral principles or even safety for that matter. And so when a teen encounters a moment of temptation, whether it's the urge to skip homework or to eat junk food or to view pornography, well, A well-functioning cognitive system goes through a rapid microsecond sequence. So it looks something like this. The impulse arises and the limbic system flashes this desire, this urge. The next would be the pause, which would be sustained attention allows the brain to hold that impulse in place without immediately acting on it. And then would come executive evaluation. So the prefrontal cortex accesses long-term values, it remembers past consequences, it considers the future, and then finally the break or the inhibitory control kicks in and the teen would redirect their attention elsewhere. And so this entire protective mechanism depends almost entirely on that second step, the pause. So if the teen cannot sustain attention or an uncomfortable internal thought or emotion for more than 3 seconds, then the pause disappears. So to follow that up in a classic widely cited study that was published in Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research, Dr. Catherine Winstanley and her team, they investigated the direct relationship between attentional deficits and heightened impulsivity. And what was established in this study was that when you impair attentional control, you also wreck the brain's inhibitory braking system. So in other words, when attentional stamina decays, the brain defaults to reactivity. So let's consider what happens in a typical teen boy's life, maybe after school. Then it'll look something like he sits down in his room to study, do some homework. And homework, as we know, requires sustained attention, which feels slow and is demanding, and it's really low in that immediate dopamine. So within 5 minutes, his brain experiences cognitive fatigue and low-grade stress because his attentional control has been compromised by hours of scrolling short-form video feeds. He simply cannot tolerate that quiet, stressful space. His brain demands an immediate dopamine reset to escape the discomfort. So he picks up his phone, he scrolls, but maybe after about 20 minutes of swiping, his baseline tolerance for dopamine has escalated. So simple videos no longer cut through the noise, and his hyper-stimulated nervous system seeks the ultimate highest yield reward mechanism available on the internet. And of course, that is explicit high novelty porn. And so pornography and short form video feeds, they operate on that exact same psychological architecture, but pornography is short form content on steroids because it offers literally unlimited novelty with a single click or swipe. There's zero social friction or risk of rejection. There's absolute anonymity and that overwhelming artificial surge of dopamine and endorphins. So when a teen boy whose cognitive brakes have been worn down by hours of algorithmic scrolling, when they experience that urge for pornography, he's not making a reasoned, calculated moral choice to betray his values. He's experiencing a cognitive hijack, really. His degraded prefrontal cortex simply does not possess the neurological stamina required to hit the brakes, tolerate the craving, and steer his mind in a different direction. Well, parents, if you're listening to this and you are recognizing your son in what I've described, I want you to I want to pause and offer you a profound sense of hope. I know it sounds discouraging, but please do remember neural pathways are malleable. And this is the concept of neuroplasticity. Just as the brain can be conditioned into hyper-reactivity and fragmentation, it can also be retrained, healed, and restored. But it is important that we have to be realistic about what works and what doesn't. So here's the thing, simply installing another monitoring app or changing the Wi-Fi password again, or taking his phone away for the weekend, or delivering another fiery lecture on morality and values. Unfortunately, that is not going to repair a degraded prefrontal cortex. And you cannot lecture a broken brake pad into stopping a moving car. So if his brain's attention and reward systems have been physically altered, then he needs structured evidence-based interventions that are designed specifically to rebuild cognitive control and deregulate his nervous system. Let me tell you about Jordan, 17-year-old high school senior, came into treatment by his mom. And Jordan's story was pretty severe. He was spending probably 4, 5, 6 hours a day engaged in compulsive digital behaviors, which tended to spiral from social media algorithms and then into severe escalating porn consumption. And he had developed a fairly intense social anxiety, couldn't make eye contact with peers, failing out of his senior year of high school and was really experiencing almost like a deep form of panic attacks whenever his parents would try to enforce tech boundaries at home. And so with Jordan, we implemented call it a two-tiered evidence-based approach that addresses both daily cognitive habits and the deep environmental reset that young men in this situation often desperately need. So first stage of Jordan's treatment involved highly structured offline cognitive behavioral framework that we called the recovery toolbox for teens. So when a teen is stuck in a digital addiction cycle, vague goals like, well, I'm just going to stop watching it, or I'm going to try harder, well, they're almost guaranteed to fail. So with the recovery toolbox for teens, we translate that abstract desire for change into concrete, daily, measurable action grounded in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and in acceptance and commitment therapy called ACT. So let me just give you a few examples of how we utilize this with Jordan. So one of which is somatic signal mapping. So with Jordan, we taught him how to identify physical body-based warning signs of attentional fatigue and dopamine cravings before he ever even picked up his phone. So he learned to recognize things like the tight chest, restless legs, vibrating brain, recognize those feelings as signals that his nervous system was starting to dysregulate. Along with that, we worked on what we call the break building protocol. Instead of trying to simply white knuckle his way through cravings or impulses or urges or temptations, Jordan, we equipped him with specific offline somatic grounding techniques. So one thing was like a 3-minute visual and physical focus exercise designed to deliberately build sustained attention muscles in his brain to try to, again, rebuild his capacity for sustained attention. Trigger and loop auditing. So with Jordan, mapping out kind of the exact daily vulnerability loops where his relapses would occur, realizing that his highest risk window, it actually wasn't late at night in his case. It's really the kind of this 30-minute window right after school, after he transitioned from high stress academic environments into an empty house. And a daily actionable toolkit. So the workbook provided Jordan with physical worksheets and daily tracking tools and offline emergency protocols that he used to replace his digital devices with tangible tactile coping skills. So the recovery toolbox for teens gave Jordan a structured language to understand his own mind and helped him to, over time, restore his agency. And the thing is, he was not a bad kid. He was trying to be good. He was an athlete, and he was working to train his brain to regain control over its own attention. So, but here's the thing, for many teens, structured outpatient work and the use of the recovery toolbox is enough to break the cycle. But in some cases, the digital saturation is so severe and the nervous system is so deeply locked into this hyperdopamine loop that every attempt to set boundaries results in confrontations and relapses. And so in those cases, that baseline level of stimulation is just simply too high for outpatient therapy alone to cut through the noise. And so for some of our guys, they really do need a complete deep environmental reset. And this is where we recommend Star Guides Wilderness Therapy. Star Guides specialized outdoor behavioral health program is built specifically for adolescent males dealing with compulsive sexual behaviors, technology overuse, screen, pornography dependency. And so think about what happens when a teen boy steps into a wilderness therapy setting. So one is the complete digital desaturation. So the digital noise vanishes instantly there because there are no algorithms, no screens, no notifications, no adult websites hiding behind a swipe. For the first time, sometimes in years, the adolescent nervous system is allowed to experience true, deep deregulation. So along with that, the natural attention restorations. Environmental psychology has long documented the concept of attentional restoration theory. So in other words, natural wilderness environments engage what researchers call the soft fascination, the gentle visual and sensory input of things like trees and mountains and fire and sky and wind. This allows the overworked, fatigued, direct attention mechanisms of the prefrontal cortex to rest and to begin to repair. In the wilderness, a boy cannot simply swipe away the discomfort or the boredom or the sadness. He must sit in the present, whether that be around a campfire or on a hike or the night sky, and he has to look his peers in the eye, and he has to learn to set up shelters and to talk through his emotions with our specialized licensed clinicians. And this is where relational healing and accountability can occur. So instead of isolating behind a screen in a dark bedroom, young men as star guides build authentic, deep, real-world relationships with their therapists, with field staff, with their peers who are also walking the exact same path. They learn that true intimacy comes from vulnerability, not hypersexualized digital consumption. And so for the boys that come to Star Guides, those weeks and months at Star Guides completely transform the trajectory of their lives. Away from the screen, the sustained attention span returns and the nervous system is settled. Their eyes clear up, humor returns, and they develop a deep, authentic sense of self-worth that is grounded in real-world competence, not seeking digital validation. And when these boys return home, they have cognitive clarity and emotional maturity that is required to reintegrate into life effectively. Well, parents, as we begin to wrap up today's episode, I want to pull all these threads together for you. If your son is caught in the grip of compulsive pornography use, I know how heavy that burden feels, and it is easy to look at him and maybe feel anger or betrayal or grief or helplessness. But I do want to challenge you today to reframe how you see this struggle. And typically engineered attention economy and human history, the brain, teen brains, they're being targeted by multi-billion-dollar algorithmic systems that are designed to break their attention span, to erode self-control, to keep them hooked on high dopamine digital inputs. And so the struggle with pornography, it's not a sign that he's a lost cause or that he's fundamentally a bad person. It's a signal that his cognitive infrastructure is overwhelmed and his nervous system is crying out for help. So when you shift your perspective from shame and punishment and disappointment into clinical understanding and structured intervention, everything can change. You stop fighting with him and you start fighting for him. So parents, you can help him reclaim his mind. You can help him build his cognitive brakes back up by taking active steps to protect his focus, reducing or eliminating that toxic cycle of the short form algorithmic media and bringing evidence-based tools into your home. You can guide him out of that digital fog and back into the real world. So if you're ready to take that next step, well, I highly recommend that you look at the resources that we discussed today. Recovery Toolbox for Teens, practical daily cognitive behavioral system, trio of workbooks that are designed to give your son tangible tools to map triggers, manage impulses, rebuild his attention span step by step. And you can do it as a parent-led intervention in the home, or you can work collaboratively with an outpatient clinician through that process. And you can get the Recovery Toolbox for Teens in the bookstore, therapyassociates.net in the bookstore. And Star Guides Wilderness Therapy, so premier outdoor behavioral healthcare program for teen boys who need a complete environmental reset to heal from tech and porn addiction and compulsive sexual behaviors. And you can learn more about Star Guides, the website starguides.net. Parents, you don't have to navigate this digital minefield alone. There is a path forward. There is clinical proof that these young men can and do recovery, and there is profound hope for your family's future. Parents, thank you so much for spending your time with me today on the Parent Guide. The episode brought you some clarity, some comfort, or actionable insights, then take a moment, subscribe to the podcast for our weekly broadcasts. Leave us a review, share the episode with a parent or therapist, family who needs to hear this message today. I'm Matt Bulkley. Keep going, stay hopeful, and I will see you in the next episode.